7 days. That is how long the seismograph beneath Kilauea's summit has been drawing the same line, not a flat line, a climbing line, each day higher than the one before it. Each day's tremor slightly more frequent, slightly deeper, slightly closer to a threshold that volcanologists have been circling for a week. But here's the detail no coverage is leading with. The word in the HVO bulletin this morning is not eruption. It is explosion. Those are not the same word. And the difference between them, the specific physical difference, is the reason scientists are not just watching the summit right now. They are watching the ground beneath it, and what is underneath the ground. And what happens when those two things meet the magma that has been building for 7 days? Here is what this video covers. Most people watching Kilauea news assume the next event will look like the last one. Lava fountains, a glowing crater, beautiful footage from the rim. That assumption is built on the recent eruption cycle, a series of effusive summit eruptions that have been, by volcanic standards, photogenic and contained. But the 7-day pressure buildup now documented in HVO monitoring data is not pointing clearly toward that kind of eruption. It is pointing toward something that Kilauea has produced before. Less frequently, less predictably, and far more violently. An explosion, not a lava fountain, not an effusive lava lake, an explosion in the original sense of the word. One that throws material outward, not upward, at velocities that no observation point near the crater is safe from. The last time Kilauea produced this kind of event during a true explosive eruption, the crater rim itself was the most dangerous place on the island. That event is in the historical record. It has a date. And the 7-day pressure signal building in the current data has more in common with that date than with any recent eruption episode. Stay with me. Because what is building beneath Kilauea right now is not a question of whether lava appears. It is a question of what comes out first, the lava or the pressure behind it. The Hawaiian Volcano Observatory publishes daily updates. Most days, those updates are incremental, small changes, baseline readings, the steady accumulation of data from a volcano that is always doing something. The update 7 days ago was the first one that contained a phrase experienced volcanologists do not pass over quickly. Sustained inflationary trend with increasing deep seismicity. Deep seismicity. That phrase matters. In Kilauea's monitoring framework, earthquake depth tells you where in the magmatic system the energy is originating. Shallow earthquakes, under 5 kilometers, indicate processes near the surface, dome growth, conduit pressurization, the kinds of signals that precede the recent effusive episodes. Deep earthquakes, 10 kilometers and below, indicate the magmatic supply system. The deep plumbing, the zone where the Hawaiian hotspot pushes material upward through the Pacific plate. When deep seismicity increases and sustains for multiple days, it is not the shallow reservoir talking, it is the supply system. Something has changed in the rate or pressure of magma delivery from depth. Not a pulse, not a DI event, not the normal daily fluctuation. A sustained 7-day increase in the activity of the system that feeds everything above it. By day 3, GPS stations around the summit were recording inflation rates above the pre-eruptive baseline of any recent episode. By day 5, SO2 emission rates had climbed to levels not recorded since the opening. Hours of the most energetic eruption episodes in the current cycle. By day 7, this morning, the seismicity had migrated, not just deep, not just beneath the summit, into a zone that sits between the deep supply and the shallow reservoir, the intermediate plumbing, magma filling the space between the system that generates it and the crater that expresses it. That migration is the signal that changes the risk profile of everything that follows. Because what happens in the intermediate zone, what the magma encounters there, is what determines whether the next event is an eruption or an explosion. There are 2 fundamentally different ways Kilauea can release pressure. Most coverage treats them as the same. They are not. The first is effusive eruption. Magma reaches the surface through an established conduit. It exits as lava, it flows, it fountains, it builds lava lakes and lava fields and new land at the ocean entry. It is destructive to property in its direct path. It is rarely immediately fatal to people who are mobile and have warning. Effusive eruption is the Kilauea that makes the tourist footage. The second is explosive eruption. Explosive eruption at Kilauea does not require a new magma type. It does not require a more violent volcanic system. It requires one thing, water. When rising magma encounters a body of water, groundwater, a crater lake, a water-saturated rock layer, the interaction is not gradual. The magma flashes the water to steam faster than the steam can expand. The pressure of that instantaneous water-to-steam conversion is released outward, violently, explosively, without the effusive buildup that gives communities warning time. This mechanism has a name, phreatic eruption, or phreatomagmatic eruption, when the magma itself participates in the explosion. It does not build a lava lake. It does not fountain prettily. It blasts. outward and upward simultaneously, without the gradual onset that characterizes effusive activity. And the critical geological fact about Kilauea's summit crater, Halemaumau, is that it sits above a fractured rock system with documented groundwater presence, water that has been accumulating in the crater floor and in the rock beneath it since the 2018 eruption drained the lava lake and left the crater exposed to rainfall and groundwater infiltration. 7 days of pressure building from depth. A water-saturated rock layer between that pressure and the surface. Those are not independent facts. Here's the historical anchor that makes the current signal stack impossible to read as routine. In May 1924, Kilauea's summit crater went through a sequence that volcanologists have spent a century studying. The lava lake, which had been present in Halemaumau crater for years, drained suddenly, completely. As it drained, the crater floor collapsed. The crater deepened rapidly. Groundwater from the surrounding rock flooded into the newly exposed void. And then, when the rising magma encountered that groundwater, Kilauea exploded. Not metaphorically, not eruptively, explosively. For 17 days, the volcano threw material outward from the crater rim. Ballistic blocks, boulders the size of automobiles, were hurled up to 1 kilometer from the crater. One man was killed by a falling block more than 300 meters from the crater rim. His name was Truman Taylor. He was watching the eruption from what everyone present believed was a safe distance. The 1924 explosions sent ash columns rising to 6 kilometers. Hilo, 40 kilometers from the summit, received ashfall. The crater itself widened by hundreds of meters as explosion after explosion excavated its walls. This was not a volcanic anomaly. This was Kilauea doing something it is capable of under specific conditions. Conditions that begin with a rapid pressure change in the summit system, and then a water encounter. The 7-day pressure buildup currently documented in HVO data is the first condition. The water is already in the crater system. It has been there since 2018. The second condition is not hypothetical. It is geological. The HVO bulletin this morning describes the current situation as elevated unrest with potential for rapid onset eruptive activity. That language is accurate. It is also incomplete in a way that matters. Rapid onset is doing significant work in that sentence. In the context of Kilauea's recent eruption history, the effusive episodes of 2020 through 2024, rapid onset meant hours of escalating precursors before lava appeared. In the context of a phreatic or phreatomagmatic explosion, rapid onset means something different. It can mean minutes, not hours. Minutes from the moment magma contacts a sufficient water body at the right pressure differential, the steam generation is nearly instantaneous. The explosion that follows is not preceded by lava fountaining. It is not preceded by a visible glow in the crater. It is not preceded by the visual signals that have allowed safe monitoring from the crater rim during recent effusive episodes. In a phreatic explosion, the first visible signal and the explosion itself can be separated by seconds. Not minutes, not hours, seconds. This is why the 1924 event produced a fatality at a distance that everyone present believed was safe. And this is why the HVO has modified access protocols at the crater rim in the past 48 hours. The viewing overlooks that were open during recent eruptions, the ones where visitors stood with cameras and phones watching the lava lake, have been assessed under a different risk model this week. A model that accounts not just for SO2 concentrations and lava fountain height, but for ballistic trajectory from a potential explosive event. That assessment has not been publicized widely, but the protocol changes that resulted from it are already in place. Start at the crater. A phreatomagmatic explosion at Halemaumau sends a column of fragmented rock, ash, and steam to 6 kilometers altitude, or higher. The 1924 event produced 6 kilometers. A more energetic event, with a larger water body and higher magma pressure, could exceed that significantly, move outward. Ballistic material, the blocks thrown outward by the explosion, lands within a radius extending to 1 kilometer from the crater rim. The national park access roads within that radius are closed. Move outward. The ash column drifts downwind. Hilo International Airport, serving the Big Island's largest city, sits 40 kilometers from the summit. In 1924, Hilo received ashfall. An ash column exceeding 6 kilometers from a significant phreatomagmatic explosion would generate an aviation advisory for all flight paths over the Big Island and potentially over the Hawaii Island chain. The Honolulu Air Route Traffic Control Center, which manages airspace over the Hawaiian Islands, maintains Kilauea explosive eruption protocols. Those protocols have not been activated since 2018. They are currently being reviewed. Move outward further. Hawaii Volcanoes National Park received 2.7 million visitors in 2023. On any given day, several thousand people are in the park. Simultaneously, on access roads, at overlooks, on hiking trails that traverse the caldera rim, an explosive eruption with ballistic ejection and a rapidly expanding ash cloud generates an evacuation scenario for thousands of visitors simultaneously. on roads designed for scenic access, not mass emergency egress, in a national park where the primary exit routes are limited by geography and lava fields on 3 sides. The people who are in the park right now, the ones who came to see what Kilauea has been building toward, are inside the scenario they came to witness. Go back to the seismograph. 7 days of data, 7 days of a climbing line. Here is what that line is actually composed of. Day 1. Baseline deep seismicity elevation, within the range of previous pre-eruptive signals. Notable. Not alarming. Day 2. Sustained. Not a pulse, not a DI event. Continuous? Scientists note the duration. Day 3. GPS inflation above any single day reading in the pre-eruptive record of recent episodes. SO2 begins climbing. Day 4. Seismicity deepens further. The intermediate zone activates, magma filling the space between supply and summit. Day 5. SO2 at peak pre-eruptive levels. Shallow seismicity increases beneath the crater floor. The water-bearing rock layers are now between active magma and the surface. Day 6. HVO modifies crater rim access protocols. The bulletin language shifts. Potential for rapid onset. Day 7. This morning. The seismicity migrates upward into the shallow system. The gap between the magma and the water-bearing layers closes. 7 days, 1 line, 1 direction. The line is not reversed. It is not plateaued. It is still climbing as this script is being read. And the distance between where the line is now and where it was the last time Kilauea exploded is not a large distance anymore. There are 3 ways to read 7 days of escalating pressure beneath Kilauea's summit. The 7-day buildup represents elevated magmatic supply that will express itself through the established conduit system. Lava appears in Halama Uma'u. The eruption is effusive. The lava lake reforms. Fountains build within the caldera walls. The water in the crater system is not contacted directly by magma. It is displaced or vaporized gradually as lava fills the crater from below. Steam plumes form. SO2 spikes. Aviation advisories are issued. But the character of the eruption is effusive rather than explosive. The 7-day buildup produced a larger than average eruption onset, more vigorous fountaining, higher SO2, but not a fundamentally different type of event. This remains the most statistically probable outcome based on the frequency of effusive versus explosive events in Kilauea's modern monitoring record. Its weakness, the intermediate zone seismicity and the specific depth migration pattern of the past 48 hours, is not characteristic of purely effusive precursory sequences. It is more consistent with the scenario below. The rising magma contacts the water-saturated rock layers in the shallow system. The initial eruption onset is explosive, a phreatic or phreatomagmatic burst that clears the shallow system and opens the conduit. This produces a brief but significant explosion with ballistic ejection, an ash column, and an ashfall footprint extending to high-low and beyond, followed by effusive activity as the conduit clears and lava reaches the surface through the opened pathway. This mixed eruption scenario is the most historically consistent with the current signal stack. The 2018 eruption sequence included phreatic explosions at the summit before and during the main eruptive activity. Those 2018 phreatic events were smaller than 1924. Whether the current buildup, 7 days of sustained deep pressure, produces a 2018 scale phreatic event or approaches 1924 scale, depends on the volume of water in the shallow system and the pressure differential at contact. Neither of those parameters is directly measurable from the surface. The intermediate zone fills completely. Magma pressure in the shallow system rises to the level at which the phreatic component is not a clearing burst preceding effusive activity. It is the eruption. A sustained explosive sequence analogous to 1924, multiple explosions over days, that excavates the crater, ejects ballistic material to the limits of the park boundary, and sends ash columns above the aviation threshold repeatedly. This scenario does not produce a photogenic lava lake. It produces a crater that expands with each explosion. It produces an evacuation footprint that extends beyond the park. It produces a monitoring challenge of a different order, because phreatic explosions are among the least predictable events in the volcanic repertoire. Each explosion changes the geometry of the water-magma interface. Each change alters the conditions for the next explosion. The sequence does not follow a predictable escalation curve. It follows the geometry of the encounter, which cannot be known in advance. Here is what 7 days of HVO monitoring has established with certainty. The magmatic supply rate has been elevated and sustained for an unprecedented duration in the current eruption cycle. The intermediate plumbing is more pressurized now than at the onset of any recent episode. The shallow system sits above documented water-bearing rock layers. Those 3 things are facts: measured, confirmed, published. Here is what 7 days of monitoring has not and cannot determine: the precise location of the water-magma contact point, the volume of water in the crater's fractured subsurface, the exact pressure differential at which magma and water will interact, and whether That interaction happens gradually enough to produce a steam-driven effusive onset, or suddenly enough to produce a pressure wave that the crater rim cannot contain. Phreatic explosions are the category of volcanic event, with the shortest and least reliable warning window in the entire hazard spectrum. Magmatic eruptions telegraph themselves. They inflate the ground. They generate seismicity. They emit SO2. They give scientists the precursory fingerprint that monitoring systems are built to detect. Phreatic explosions can bypass that fingerprint entirely. The magma does not reach the surface. The seismicity does not migrate shallowly. The SO2 does not spike dramatically. Because the explosion is not the magma erupting. It is the water boiling, and water gives almost no seismic warning before it turns to steam. The 7-day pressure buildup is the most legible part of this story. What happens when that pressure meets the water? That is the illegible part. And the illegible part is the one that determines whether the people on the crater rim in the next hour are witnessing history or inside it. 7 days. The seismograph has drawn 7 days of a climbing line. Each day a longer version of the same sentence. Pressure, building, sustained. And somewhere in the fractured rock beneath Halema Umayu crater, in the dark zone between the magma column and the water-saturated layers above it, the two things that have been separated by geology and temperature for the years since 2018 are drawing closer. Not quickly, not all at once, in the way that pressure always moves through rock, slowly at first and then not slowly at all. The HVO scientists who have been watching this line climb for 7 days have seen eruptions begin from signals that looked like this. They have also seen signals like this resolve without eruption, the pressure redistributing, the seismicity fading, the inflation plateauing and then reversing. 7 days does not guarantee an 8th-day explosion. But 7 days of sustained, deepening, upward migrating pressure accumulation, without the normal variance, without the daily DI cycling, without the fluctuation that characterizes the system finding its equilibrium, is a system that has not found equilibrium. It is a system still looking for where to put what it has been given for 7 days. The crater is one answer. The water is another. Kilauea has known the difference since 1924. The difference is a question of geometry, of which pathway the pressure finds first. And that question is being answered right now, in the dark, in the rock. In the zone the instruments measure but cannot enter. In the space between the 7th day's line and wherever the 8th day's line begins, the seismograph is still running, the line is still climbing, and the space between the magma and the water above it is smaller now than it was 7 days ago, smaller than it was yesterday, smaller than it was when this sentence started,